This is Muhammad Nader from Egypt, and I will be happy to sharing today this session. This session will be made of two parts. We will start with a keynote speaker, Dr. Phil Arko, followed by oral presentations. Please, if you would like to ask any questions to the keynote speaker, you can write it on the questions and answer section, or you can vote for your favorites. We will have a short questions session at the end of the presentation. The speaker will have the opportunity to answer in writing those questions. Without further delay, I would like to introduce you to our keynote speaker, Dr. Phil Arko from National Link Coalition in the United States of America, presenting the interconnection between animal and human abuse and neglect. Dr. Arko, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mohammed, and thank you, everybody out there. Yes, I head this group called the National Link Coalition, and the link refers to these 4 circles that you're seeing there, showing that animal abuse is not a standalone issue. It's not isolated. It very often overlaps 3 other forms of family violence: child abuse, domestic violence, and elder abuse. And it's a one health, one welfare approach, getting people in these various fields, particularly veterinarians, to recognize that they might in fact see multiple forms of family violence and to work in an interdisciplinary measure to work together, to collaborate, because no one agency has enough resources to solve all these problems themselves. We're the National Resource Center in the United States on the link between animal abuse and human violence, but we work internationally and have done extensive trainings all around the world. And we have members in 55 countries right now, I believe. There is my email address. There's our website, and all this information and much more is available for free on our website at nationallinkcoalition.org. I got involved with this back in the 1980s through a number of different things that happened, but one in particular, which was a one welfare issue. I was doing a training for some teachers, and I brought a local veterinarian in to talk about pets to the teachers. And at the time, I was the delegate to the American Veterinary Medical Association's Animal Welfare Committee. And I got curious about an issue, and I asked the veterinarian if he had to report suspected child abuse, because all the teachers in the room were mandated to report child abuse. Well, it turned out that he did. I was in the state of Colorado at the time, which was the only state in the US at that point that required veterinarians to report child abuse. But then I said, well, do you have to report animal abuse to us at the animal shelter? And he said, no, why would I want to do that? I might lose a client. And I thought that was ironic, and I thought it was a real contradiction. And I asked myself, shouldn't veterinarians be as responsive in responding to animal abuse as physicians and teachers are in responding to child abuse? Well, there are a number of us around the US who were thinking along similar lines. And in 2008, we got together and we created this National Link Coalition. And today we have over 4,600 people in 55 countries that get our free monthly link letter. And if you would like to be on the list and receive this as well, just send me an email. Just tell me what agency you're with and where you're located. And what we are is a international informal collaboration looking through programs, through public policy, building public and professional awareness, and backing it all up with academic research to show how these 4 forms of family violence are linked together. And our academic background on this is extremely extensive. We have over 1,500 citations in our bibliography right now. We conduct trainings like this all over the world, and our goal is to make families and communities healthier and safer. The link connects the dots. Traditionally, these 4 areas of family violence, child abuse, elder abuse, domestic violence, and animal abuse, have all been operating in silos, and they haven't been connected. And of those 4 fields, the animal side has always been marginalized. It's always been on the outside because government leaders and funders and human service agencies all think that animals are less important than people. So they've always been on the outside. And in fact, the other three areas weren't working together either until the early 1990s, when people began to finally realize that domestic violence affects children and that seniors also have domestic violence issues as well. They started coming together, but the animal people were still on the outside. Well, the link changes that because we realize that we're all dealing with the same victims. We're all dealing with the same abusers. And the problems that all four of these agencies and fields have are too great to solve independently. By collaborating and combining our limited resources, we improve communities' effectiveness at solving these overarching issues of violence. And so this is the model we use now. It connects the dots and it shows that when animals are abused, people are at risk. And when people are abused, animals are at risk. And it's really just as simple as that. And we're training people who are in any of these fields or working with any of these fields to recognize that they may see multiple forms of family violence. It really is a one welfare issue, or as we call it here in the US, one health, focusing on animal welfare, human well-being, and the environment. And this is a British model. I'm not sure if this is similar in other countries, but if we look at the umbrella of one welfare, it includes the link between animal and human abuse, reducing that abuse, addressing child abuse, animal hoarding, domestic violence, gangs, dangerous dogs, reducing crime, and increasing collaborations among different agencies. So it purely is and truly is a one health issue or one welfare. Some of the basic premises of the link. Animal cruelty cases in all countries of the world have traditionally been marginalized by law enforcement, by the courts, by social services, and by the public, who say, oh, it's only an animal. And because no animal agency, no animal welfare agency, no human services agency has adequate resources, we have duplication of efforts. By collaborating, we can reduce that duplication and be much more effective. There's a big debate as to whether animals have legal rights, and they do not. And there's a schism within the animal field between animal welfare, which says we have a moral obligation to care for animals, and the animal rights community that says animals have rights in and of themselves. We've never resolved that difference. The link bridges all that. And it says, let's not focus on that. Let's focus on the fact that animal abuse hurts people as well. And that is a message that law enforcement, courts, and legislators understand. And by showing that animal abuse is a potential indicator or predictor of other crimes, they begin to focus on this as a significant issue. And I emphasize the word potential. It doesn't always mean that animal abuse is linked to other crimes, but very frequently it does, either before or after those other crimes. And if we engage in what we call species spanning collaborations to prevent animal abuse, to prosecute it, and to punish offenders, we not only benefit man's best friend, the animals, but we also benefit mankind. And we really benefit women, as I'll show you how here shortly. There are several different types of these links. And I'm running through this because this is normally a 2-hour presentation. I'm trying to get down in about 25 minutes. But the most dramatic form is domestic violence, where the abuser, who's usually a man, threatens, hurts, or kills the family pets as a way to control the other human members of the family. It's what we call emotional extortion. And it's part of the domestic violence methods of power and control, which keeps the victim, usually a woman, and her children from leaving. It holds the whole family hostage. And it's a way for him to demonstrate his power, to intimidate them, and to retaliate against her or the people who help her escape. And so the animals become victims in this as well, collateral damage, if you will. We have a similar situation in child sexual abuse, where the abuser threatens, hurts, or kills the little boy's or little girl's pet as a way to ensure silence so that they don't talk about it. We have the issue of child abuse, the impact on children who hurt or kill animals, or even if they just witness the animal abuse, can be emotionally devastating over the course of a lifetime. Animal hoarding is a very serious issue. It tends to affect older people, so it's linked very closely with elder abuse issues. Animal fighting, dog fighting and cockfighting in particular, and they are very strongly linked with other crimes: human trafficking, narcotics, weapons, homicide, gambling, and many, many other offenses. And the latest area of the link is animal sexual abuse. People who prefer to have sex with animals, and it is very strongly linked with cases of child sexual abuse and child pornography in particular. Animal abuse is a human health concern, and it's just some of the data we have on this, and we have much more, but I'll give you just a couple of examples. One study was looking at dog bite fatalities and trying to identify if specific breeds, such as pit bulls, are more responsible for human deaths. And what we found was that in addition to the breed issue, more than 1/5 of dog bite fatalities in the US over a 10-year period were animals that had been abused. And they fought back the only way they could, with their teeth. 21% of these fatalities, the animals were abused. A more recent study looked at domestic violence incidents. Any law enforcement officer will tell you that the cases they hate the most are domestic violence issues, because they go into a situation where they don't know who's fighting with who, and the risk of death for first responders in domestic violence situations is extremely high. Well, that risk doubles. The risk of lethality for a first responder doubles if there's also animal abuse involved. Lots of recent evidence on this animal sexual abuse issue. One significant statistic: 31% of animal sex offenders also were involved with sex offenses against children and adults. This is just the tip of the iceberg of the research that we have. Animal welfare should be considered a social concern. Traditionally, families are seen by social service agencies like this, and if they have pets, they're on the periphery. They're marginalized. People don't think they're important. And consequently, veterinarians are not treated the same way that physicians are. Animal shelters, animal welfare agencies, animal control agencies are not put on a par with human social service agencies. The link changes that and moves that circle into the family. And it shows that the pets are members of the family. They're all linked together, and it makes veterinarians as the other family doctor and puts veterinarians on a par with physicians and on the front lines of preventing crimes against animals. Very briefly, I'll look at these different types of links in the domestic violence connection there, because women and children in particular have very strong emotional bonds with their pets. That makes the animals soft targets, and they can be exploited by abusers to extract emotional, physical, financial, and sexual abuse against the human members of the family. The fear of what will happen to the animals prevents a huge number of women and children from leaving abusive situations. Children in these homes where there's so much physical violence going on hurt or kill animals themselves because they are repeating the behaviors they see the adults doing. We need to tell domestic violence survivors that if animals are being abused, it's a wake-up call that they are not at fault, the animals are not at fault. If he's hurting harmless animals, it's his fault, and they really need to get out of that situation. The link between animal abuse and child abuse is even older. We know that childhood acts of animal cruelty are one of the earliest signs of conduct disorder. They start showing up at about the age of 6.5. Children who have been sexually abused fear for the safety of their pets as well. Children who not only commit animal cruelty, but who also witness it are at a much greater risk of antisocial behavior. Children who bully other children are at a greater risk of abusing animals, but also children who have been bullied are at a greater risk of abusing animals. Children who have been victimized will take the aggression that's been directed at them and transfer it against the animals in their household. We are trying to train caseworkers in child protection to be on the lookout for dangerous animals in the home that threaten the child's safety. Children attend dog fights and cockfights, and they become desensitized against the violence. And in any of these homes where there's all this chaos going on, that pet may be the child's only comfort, only strong emotional support. People often think that all serial killers grow up or started out hurting animals, and it's not true. Not all childhood animal abusers grow up to become psychopaths. Many of them do, but not all of them. And we also know that some children who are surrounded by all this violence seek comfort in their animals and try to protect them rather than harm them. The links with elder abuse, because elders often have physical limitations, financial constraints, memory losses, we see a number of different issues that affect animals. We see the pets being neglected. They may not be fed properly or overfed, or they're not allowed to go to the bathroom outside, or they can't afford veterinary care. We have cases of elders neglecting themselves. And so they will take what limited money they have and spend it on their animals instead of themselves. And so consequently, they're eating pet food, or they don't go into a hospital or a nursing home because there's nobody to care for their animals. The attachment that seniors have for their pets can be extreme. And if that pet dies, it can be devastating. That pet may be the only companion this person has, the only opportunity for getting outside and walking and getting exercise. It may be the last link to a loved one who passed away. The issue of caseworkers and home health aides who often don't want to go into a house where there are all these animals because they are afraid of them, or because the house is filthy from a hoarding situation. We have cases of financial exploitation of children who hold their elderly parents' pets as hostage for ransom money to extract money from them. Cases of disabled people who depend on a service animal and their partners are jealous over that attachment that the disabled partner has with the service animal. And then the animal hoarding issue, which is a lot of different psychological roots to it. Mostly it's an attachment disorder. And unfortunately, there is a 100% recidivism rate. We haven't found a cure for this yet. So where do we go with all this? Well, veterinarians have to play a major role with this. And one study in Canada found that the public is more likely to report suspected animal abuse to their veterinarian than they are to an animal shelter or to the police department. And so veterinarians need to be prepared to recognize and respond to possible animal abuse and turn it over to investigators and law enforcement authorities. This has been a 25-year process to get veterinarians engaged with this, starting with making veterinarians aware of their responsibility, then not being afraid of losing a client, but recognizing their objectives of protecting animals and people, getting support from the national bodies, and we have the National Veterinary Associations in the US, Canada, the UK, and New Zealand, and several other countries, giving veterinarians either permission or requiring them to report suspected abuse, laws that now enable them to do that. Through the new field of veterinary forensics, we're developing the diagnostic tools so they can identify the typical injuries that are presented that suggest animal abuse as opposed to an accident. We have guidelines for practice so that they can implement these ideas in their practice, and then providing them with reference numbers as to who to call to report that abuse. All this information, by the way, is on our website. Animal shelters are getting involved with this. And the animal shelter community is a new philosophy that is addressing the human problems that underlie animal issues, and recognizing that treating the symptoms of animal welfare problems, such as animal homelessness, abuse, and neglect, is really only a stopgap solution. If we want to be really effective, we have to address the community and family dysfunction and violence, which is the root cause of what's going wrong with the animals. We need to get more social workers involved with this. A couple of ways we're doing this. The premier program is at the University of Tennessee here in the US. It's called Veterinary Social Work. And we are training social workers to work in veterinary hospitals and do what we call the human side of veterinary medicine and the animal side of social work. The diagram on the right is called a genogram. It's a common diagram used in social work to show the emotional attachments that people in a household have with each other. And we're now including animals in those genograms to show that there are, in fact, human-animal bonds and that people are emotionally attached to their animals and they are significant relationships. That's a whole new concept for people in social work, to accept that there are animals in people's mindsets. Focusing on the link has accomplished a tremendous amount. Because dogs and cats and horses don't vote, legislators rarely pay attention to animal welfare issues. But by showing how animal abuse hurts people and improves public health and safety, now they can understand why this is important. So some of the things we're seeing, for example, our Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, now is including 4 types of animal cruelty within their national data collection system. We've never had this before. All 50 of our states in the United States now have at least some laws that are higher penalties, we're called felonies, instead of just the lower level misdemeanor penalties. All 50 states have at least something on the books with that. Sex with animals is now illegal in 48 of our 50 states. That's a major step forward, believe it or not. 38 of our states now allow courts to include pets in domestic violence protection from abuse orders. Major step forward there. In 10 of our states, an act of animal abuse that is meant to intimidate a domestic violence partner can be prosecuted not just as animal cruelty, but also as an act of domestic violence. We now have 5 states in which courts can award custody of pets in a divorce settlement based on the animal's best interest, similar to child custody cases. In Canada, they are now imposing mandatory link training for law enforcement officers. We have a growing number of prosecutors and law enforcement agencies that have specialized task forces addressing animal cruelty issues because they are very complex and it takes specialized training. And then this growth of veterinary forensics, which makes prosecuting these cases much more effective. We're seeing more collaborations between various agencies. Over 250 domestic violence shelters in the US and a number of other countries, including Spain, allow pets. They're pet-friendly domestic violence shelters. We're seeing more and more places where child abuse, animal abuse, and elder abuse, the agencies working in those areas cross-report to each other. And we now have 40 of our states in which veterinarians are either required or permitted to report suspected animal abuse. There are still gaps in the system, and we still have a long way to go. We need to provide social workers with much more training about the human-animal bond, both in pre-professional schools of social work and in continuing education programs. Scotland and New Zealand have taken the world leadership roles in training veterinarians to respond to domestic violence. And this is really a one welfare issue. We're just starting to see some movement about this in the US. We should be routinely getting domestic violence and child abuse crisis lines to ask callers if there are animals in the household, if the animals are at risk, if there are any issues affecting the household pets as well. We need more cross-training between human services and animal welfare services and cross-reporting between these agencies. We need more pet-friendly shelters for the domestic violence survivors and for the homeless as well. And there is a phenomenon called adverse childhood experiences, the traumas that children experience in early childhood. We need to consider childhood exposure to animal cruelty as one of those adverse childhood experiences. It's a species-spanning strategy. By promoting the human benefits of animal well-being, we can make a much more effective and integrated community program. And it takes three forms. One is greater emphasis on prosecuting animal cruelty. One takes a health approach through One Health or through One Welfare by focusing on animal-assisted therapy, how pets improve our mental and physical health and our social well-being as well, and looking at the neurochemistry of the human-animal bond, and then preventing this violence through the link focus and legitimizing all that with scientific data. We make a lot more progress. The link offers us a better way. We could continue working in our silos and marking our own turf and refusing to talk to each other, or working in these silos and thinking we have nothing in common, or we could all play together in the big doggy park of life. And by getting all these agencies on the same page, we increase the power of our advocacy when it comes time for legislation. We can achieve long-term change. We can pool our limited resources, reduce duplication of efforts, and create healthier and safer communities. So that's a very quick look at all this. Mohammed, I'm not sure how we're going to take questions here. I think we have a couple of minutes. Again, visit our website. All this information and much more is free. And if you'd like to get our link letter, to be on the mailing list for this, just send me an email. Just let me know what agency you're with. So let me turn it back to Mohammed and Rebecca and whoever else is there. And where do we go from here?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Phil Arko. You're an amazing and excellent presentation. Also, I'm sure I understood well now with the link. Thank you very much. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you.
We have to move on the next presentation. So thank you, Dr. Arko, for your great presentation. Please receive our virtual round of applause. And now we will move to the oral presentation. Our first speaker is Dr. Laura Whittier from University of Edinburgh in UK, presenting What Kind of Bond? Measuring children's attachment to pets and understanding its role in cases of childhood animal harm. Dr. Laura, the floor is yours.
Hello, my name is Laura, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about some research we've been carrying out on children's bond and attachment to pets, which has been occurring within the broader context of some research on childhood animal harm. So I'm a PhD student at the University of Edinburgh. My supervisor is Professor Joe Williams, and we're both in the Department of Clinical Psychology. We've also been working with Dr. Steve Barnfield, who's developed the attachment measure we're using, the Child Attachment Play Assessment, and with the Scottish SPCA, who runs the Animal Guardians Programme, which is a programme for children at high risk of animal harm. So as I go through this talk, there's really two interrelated questions that I think some of this research is addressing. The first is, how can attachment theory help us understand the nature of children's relationships with pets? And the second is, what role does attachment play in cases of childhood animal harm? So by way of a very brief introduction, attachment is an evolved behavioral system. It was proposed in the 60s, which drives infants and as they grow up into children to seek proximity and security from primary caregivers. In this way, primary caregivers become a safe base for the child and the child's model of themselves and the world. So So attachment always starts with attachment to primary caregiver, which emerges when a child's quite young, between 3 and 6 months old. And this is where a lot of the attachment research is focused, is on attachment to primary caregivers. We know a little less about the formation of secondary attachment, which does emerge later, but is also more complex because there's lots of different sorts of relationships that might fall under this umbrella term. Attachment has been classified into different attachment styles. So the 3 main attachment styles we see are secure, where the child perceives their parent as being available and reliable and attuned to them. Insecure avoidant, where the child doesn't perceive that their parent or caregiver is there for them necessarily, and so learns that they need to rely on themselves for care, so avoids closer attachment. And insecure ambivalent, where the caregiver is maybe there, but not reliably there. And so the child is preoccupied with trying to make sure their caregiver is essentially paying attention to them and there for them. As research carried on, there was an interest in a realization that attachment styles could also lead to some more serious mental health issues. And so this later led to classifications of essentially pathological attachment patterns. So there's 2 sorts of literatures on this. One classifies it as disorganized attachment, but the classification system that we're using for this research uses this classification system that you see here. So what we have are securely attached children here that you can see, and insecure avoidant and insecure ambivalent. And essentially what it sees as pathological attachment patterns are more extreme forms of either insecure avoidant or insecure ambivalent. So then the question is, well, where do pets fit into our understanding of how attachment works? So the first thing to say is that we do know through various research that there does seem to be at least some attachment characteristics in people's relationship with pets. And so it does seem to be correct to at least say there's some attachment mechanisms occurring here. But there's a few caveats. So first of all, most of our understanding of this comes from research with adults. And a child's relationship to a pet is likely to be different for several reasons, but amongst them is that attachment needs in children are different from attachment needs in adults. So if pets do, a relationship with a pet does fit with an attachment framework, we might think of pet as secondary attachment figures rather than primary attachment figures. And so that means they might be alongside siblings, peers, grandparents, close friendships, and that sort of relationship. So that doesn't necessarily fulfill all the child's primary caregiving roles, but who a child might still turn to for comfort if the primary caregiver is not seen as being available. And then even within that, we still have to remember that pets can probably occupy a special category. So for example, we know that developmentally, children's relationship to pets don't follow the same developmental pattern as children's relationship to peers. Whereas, for example, in adolescence, attachment to peers increases, whereas there's some research to suggest that attachment to pets might decrease in adolescence. So then the question is, how does this fit into our understanding of childhood animal harm? So here I will just mention we are studying childhood animal harm rather than the more specific and perhaps more severe phenomenon, childhood animal cruelty. So this is our definition up here: any act of commission or omission where a child negatively impacts an animal's welfare. So why do we think attachment might be implicated in childhood animal harm? Well, there's 2 sorts of reasons. The first is the direct effect of attachment. So this includes especially the fact that a child's overall attachment style to a primary caregiver will generalize to other relationships. And so if that's an insecure attachment style, they might play out the sorts of behavioral patterns with pets in their family. Secondly, we also do have some data to suggest that children who are more attached to pets are less accepting of harm towards pets, logically. So that might be slightly protective. Indirect effects, though, are things that attachment affects that are also psychological risk factors for childhood animal harm. And this especially includes things like empathy, peer relationships, emotional regulation, and self-esteem. Finally, there's one manual on the treatment of childhood animal cruelty, and that's this reference that you can see down here. And in this manual, they have a model they present at the beginning showing what they consider to be the kind of core risk factors. and they have attachment at the bottom of this. But to our knowledge, there's not really any research fully confirming this. So we were interested in seeing what we found in terms of the role of attachment as a risk factor for children referred for risk of harm. So our participants for this study were children referred to the Animal Guardians program run by the Scottish SPCA, along with matched control children from the same school class, and which we tried as much as possible to match for age and gender, although that wasn't always possible. So we had a final sample of 27 children, 9 referred and 18 matched controls over the whole primary school age range. So in terms of methods, this was part of a larger study looking at other risk factors, which I won't be discussing today. But we have 3 different types of measures of attachment. The first is the CAPA, the Child Attachment Play Assessment, which, as I mentioned, uses this classification system that you see here called the Dynamic Maturational Model. And the CAPA works where you start a story that a child has to finish using the Playmobil playset you see here. And the child has to figure out the conflict in the story. This is video recorded and then coded for attachment classification. What we did is we had a core set of human stories, which are the normal stories, you would say, and we also added in 3 pet stories to sort of see how a child would handle a conflict, if you will, with a pet in a story. The other 2 measures were a little bit shorter to carry out. This was a hierarchical mapping task to see where a child placed pets and other family members or friends with the other option in relation to themselves and the distance that they might put between themselves and various family members. And finally, there was a self-report measure called the Short Attachment to Pet Scale, which has 9 items and has been validated with children in previous research. So in terms of CAPA classification results, we did see that children referred to the Animal Guardians program were more likely to be insecurely attached, especially classified as pathological insecure. What confirms this as well is that insecurely attached children had more self-reported animal harm behaviors when they filled out a small set of questions on that. So that confirms that it's not just parents or teachers being concerned, it's also self-reported behavior. And what we also see, so here what we see on the graphs is attachment was predictive across a variety of risk and protective factors. So what you see here are protective factors, which are essentially just anything where a higher score would be indicative of protection against animal harm. So higher empathy, better executive functioning, better emotion recognition. So these scores were compiled into this graph. And then on this graph, what we see is that these are all scores where all measures where a higher score would be indicative of maybe a risk factor. So these would include things like, so this is just an example, the strength and difficulties questionnaire that teachers filled out, but also callous and unemotional traits, and maybe acceptance of cruelty, these sorts of things. And what's interesting, especially in the risk factors, is we see a really big jump in amount of risk factor for pathological insecure attachment classification compared to normal insecure and secure. So next we have the hierarchical mapping task. And so I have just some example pictures here selected a little bit to show the contrasts. We do see that insecure ambivalent children drew their parents further away than secure or avoidant children. And there was also a trend so that insecurely attached children drew pets closer to themselves than securely attached children, which is quite interesting and might suggest that pets can act as a secondary attachment figure in the sense that when parents aren't perceived as available, pets might be able to be seen as sources of comfort if parents aren't. So again, these are just example pictures. On the top, we have 2 pictures from securely attached children, and on the bottom, we have pictures from insecurely attached children. I actually had to draw both of these, unfortunately, because the child didn't want to draw, but still indicated where they wanted everyone placed. And again, this is just illustrating this sort of pets are included, sometimes even when parental figures are not. So finally, the short attachment to pet scale. Interestingly, scores did not differ either between referred or control children or between secure and insecure children. So depending on how you split up the children. And this is suggestive that, well, perhaps we have too small of a sample size to detect it, but also maybe that, again, attachment to pets doesn't necessarily follow the same pattern exactly as a child's primary attachment pattern. And secondly, this was just on the cusp of significance, but we saw that higher SAPS score also correlated positively with how closely the child put the pet to themselves in their drawing. So that suggests that hopefully there may be approaching a similar construct. Okay, and finally, as I mentioned, we had human stories and pet stories. And so we wanted to understand a bit more about what was happening in children's pet stories. So we've developed a sort of coding system where children could be scored 0, 1, or 2 on 4 different dimensions. I will say we haven't got reliability for this yet, so this is subject to change if reliability doesn't come through. But for now, the results from my codings have been that children scored lower, insecure children scored lower on 3 of the 4 dimensions. Specifically, they scored lower on mentalizing about pets' thoughts and feelings. They scored lower on care behavior towards pet, and they scored especially lower on whether the parent helped resolve the conflict with the pet in their story. But interestingly, both secure and insecure children had the same scores or same mean scores on whether they felt comforted from the pet in the story. And so these are just example. So the top one is the parental help, and the bottom is comfort from pet. Violin charts to show that. So to wrap things up a little bit, so these are small sample sizes, so I think results should be interpreted with caution. And we've also used novel methods, so we need to replicate these findings in other studies and with other populations. Especially key in this is going to be developing appropriate measures for larger scale studies and measures that don't only rely on self-report. And some questions we can ask about or wonder about in that is, do we want to develop a classification system for pet attachment? Does that even make sense on a theoretical level? And how do we really see pets in attachment hierarchies overall? Are they simply a secondary attachment like any other, or do they occupy a special place in that? And so then in terms of implications for practice, in terms of treating or helping children with childhood animal harm, essentially, this research confirms that attachment plays an important role in understanding a child's risk, that it's important to assess the child's family situation, that even in cases of high risk for harm, children who might have problems with family members may still feel close to their pets. And unfortunately, that insecure attachment patterns with pets might reflect overall attachment insecurity. And in terms of our overall understanding of child-pet attachment, we do see that pets most likely can act as sources of comfort when parents or other adults are not seen as available. But pets alone, perhaps predictably, are unlikely to be able to change child's attachment style or attachment representations. But this does confirm what some research seems to show, that animals seem capable of eliciting attachment responses, especially as sources of secondary attachment, which can be useful in a therapy setting, for example. So thank you very much for listening. You have my contact details there on the slide, as well as my supervisors. We're going to go over to questions. I do have, as you can see here, a list of references, which I'm happy to send over if you want to get in touch. But so thank you very much for listening, and have a nice day.
Thank you, Dr. Laura. Thank you for your excellent presentation. Now we will move on to the next oral presentations with Dr. Nyanke Innenberg from Faculty of Veterinary Medicine, Utrecht, Netherlands, presenting the Veterinary Forensic Expert Center. Dr. Nyanke, the floor is yours.
Hello everyone, welcome to my talk about the Veterinary Forensic Expert Center. My name is Nienke Endenburg. I'm a clinical psychologist and working already for a very long time at the Faculty of Veterinary Medicine at the Utrecht University in the Netherlands. I teach there and I do a lot of research about human-animal bond in a positive way. So how can, for instance, service animals help veterans with PTSD in a good way, and also about the negative ways of human-animal interactions. So that's about. Today, I would like to tell you a little bit about the situation in the Netherlands regarding animal abuse and domestic violence, and about the Veterinary Forensic Expert Center. When I talk to veterinarians, there are a lot of misunderstandings regarding animal abuse. Very often they say animals that are abused don't come to the veterinarian. And when I explain that they do, and that animals that are abused come as often as animals that are not abused, very often they're very surprised about it. They also say, I don't want to accuse owners falsely. But very often the person who's bringing the animal to the veterinarian is not the one who's abusing the animal. Maybe this person can also be a victim of domestic violence, so that the veterinarian is having not one person, but actually two persons, or a person and an animal, in the room, in the consultation room, that are abused. What they also very often say is, I don't want to betray the trust between the veterinarian and the owner. And I can see that. And I think it's also very important to think about that. But animal abuse, you just can't look the other way. It's first sign very often of domestic violence. And I think veterinarians have a very important task in society. It is also very difficult to recognize, because pets have a coat, and that makes it difficult, and they're not able to talk. They can't say, I'm abused. Sometimes it's also very difficult to look at the behavior and to give a right interpretation of that. I've seen animals that were severely abused, but still were very nice and kind to their owners. But I also saw animals that were very afraid, but weren't abused at all. So behavior, it can be a little bit tricky. We also get at the vet school in Utrecht animals that don't have external trauma at all, but when there are CT or X-rays or MRI scans, then there are internal bleedings and a lot of broken bones that you're really shocked about it. But these animals don't show anything, and you can't see it from the outside. It also has to do with the mindset of the veterinarian. Veterinarians are educated to take care of animals, to give them good health care. And this animal abuse is totally different. So a lot of veterinarians just don't think about it. And another problem is that a lot of owners that abuse their animals don't go to one veterinarian, but they go to a lot of veterinarians. So, for instance, we had animals that went to 5 different veterinarians. Only these veterinarians they all thought they were the only one that was involved with that animal. So when animals go to more than one veterinarian, we call that a red flag for animal abuse. It doesn't say that that animal is abused, but you really have to take care of that and think about it. Well, to help veterinarians recognizing animal abuse, or when they're not sure whether or not it's animal abuse, we made the Veterinary Forensic Expert Center. In Dutch, that's called Landelijk Expertisecentrum Dierenmishandeling, and this is the first page of the website. What is the goal of the Veterinary Forensic Expert Center? It's a website, as I showed you, where veterinarians who have an account that's free of charge can upload X-rays, pictures and other relevant information like the body condition score, the age, what the veterinarian found about that animal, and they can upload it. It's a secure connection. On the other side, we have an expert panel, and that expert panel consists of specialized veterinarians. They're from the Faculty of Veterinary Medicine. But we also have forensic experts. They're from the NFI, that's the Dutch Forensic Institute. And together they look at, for instance, the X-rays or at the story. And within 48 hours, they reply to the veterinarian whether or not it's animal abuse. And it's interesting to see these two professions work together, because forensic experts look at X-rays, at the same X-ray, at a totally different way than, for instance, specialized veterinarians. And sometimes they also come to different conclusions, and then they start talking. And it's interesting and it really helps. So with 48 hours, the veterinarian gets a reply whether or not it's animal abuse, and then they can download from the website a zip file with all the information and a written statement from the expert panel whether or not it's animal abuse, and they can send it to the police, who will investigate further. For instance, who did it, who is involved, what's going on also in that family. Is it only animal abuse, or is there also domestic violence? That's for veterinarians, but more and more we also have people from the police who come to us, because I think these two professions, the forensic expert and the specialized veterinarians, it's very unique. And also the police is very interested and they send in cases. This is our website, www.meld.let.nl. Another goal of the Veterinary Forensic Experts Center is scientific research. We also want to see who is abusing animals. Why do people do that? Are there animals more at risk, or are there people of a certain age who are doing that, or if they live in a special family? We want to have more information about that to see if we can stop animal abuse at an earlier stage. And we have also Leonie van Brugge. She is a veterinary radiologist, but she's doing her PhD on veterinary forensic radiology. That's very interesting. We also work with a human radiologist, but also we work together with University of Liverpool. We also have a cooperation with the National Expert Center on Child Abuse. We have together continuing education or conferences. And that's interesting, because what they see with animal abuse, we also very often see with animal abuse. And it's interesting to work together. Like I said, the website and the accounts are available to all Dutch veterinarians. They can use it. But we also have some veterinarians from Belgium that are also very interested. And we're looking into the fact if we can translate the website into English, that it's also available to other veterinarians in the European Union. But more and more police people and prosecutors also use our expert center. And we started in November 2017, and we were very optimistic about the number of cases we would get. But until so far, we only got 50 cases. And that's a big disappointment, because we thought, well, that there were more veterinarians sending in their cases. The cases we had until so far were mainly cats, dogs, and horses. And in 50% of the cases, it was indeed animal abuse. But in the other 50%, it were illnesses, very rare illnesses, or our forensic experts saw something different than the veterinarian. So it's very interesting to look at our database, and we can learn a lot about it. But as we said, as I said, we were disappointed. So we in fact, why don't veterinarians use our expert center more often? So we did research in 2019. We asked, around 500 veterinarians, and we had a response of 2,210 veterinarians. And these were the main reasons why they didn't use our expert center. There were veterinarians that said, well, animal abuse, well, no, that's not our task. That's not the task of the veterinarian to look into that. A lot of veterinarians also said, well, we just don't have enough knowledge, and we just don't know what to do, or we don't know where to report it. They also were very concerned about the privacy of the client. And I think it's very important to look into that. But when it concerns animal abuse and maybe also domestic violence, I think that you have to report it or look into it. and the relationship with the clients. There were also veterinarians very concerned with their own safety or the safety of the practice or of their family. So it's important to look into that. But as I said, maybe we can work together and see that you're still safe, but you can report it. You see on the right side of this slide, you see our bag, our veterinary forensic expert bag that we give to students who follow our elective courses. I come to speak about that in a minute. And also veterinarians. And this bag has all the tools for veterinary forensic research. There's also a small book that you know how to sample your evidence and how not to contaminate it. So this is what we give to vet students and veterinarians who know how to use it. In our research of 2019, we also found a lot of veterinarians to say, well, we just don't have enough knowledge about animal abuse and domestic violence. We do education about this topic at the vet school. All of our students, it doesn't matter if they're large animal or horse veterinarians or companion animals, all the students get 4 hours of animal abuse and domestic violence. And you can say that's not enough. That's true, but I think it's a nice start. But we also have elective courses of 2 weeks. We call it veterinary forensic medicine. And we have that twice a year, once in February, and that's in Dutch. And we also have it in the summer school. That's the first 2 weeks of July. And then it's in English. And in this elective course, we have the specialized veterinarians and also the forensic experts. We have the police who is lecturing to the vet students. We have criminologists and psychologists. We do a lot about communication, about violence, and how to collect your evidence, what to do and what not to do. And also when you have to go to court, how do you behave in court? How do you make your reports? So it's 2 weeks. It's a lot of information also from sites that normally it's not there at the vet school. And we also have continuing education. During COVID-19, we couldn't do it live. Normally we have one continuing education day a year, but now we do it through webinars. So we also try to educate vet students, but also veterinarians that are already in practice, how to deal with animal abuse and domestic violence. This was my talk, and I would like to have some questions. So if you have questions, please ask them. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Nyanke. You did well. Thank you for your great presentations. Now we will move on to our last oral presentation with my colleague, Evelyn Segredo. She will be talking about the One Welfare Phonics project. Evelyn, the floor is yours.
Muy buenos días, muy buenas tardes a todos y a todas.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. I'm Evelyn Segredo, and I'm going to be introducing the Phoenix project, the One Welfare Phoenix project. So what I want to talk to you about in these few minutes is about our One Welfare approach, and to talk about the Phoenix project, which is part of what I'm doing right now together with our work team. And we've been having different experiences in our working groups, and we'll try to explain them as well. Therefore, first of all, we need to understand what is this One Welfare approach. As you probably know, because you've been listening to this concept throughout the whole of the day, One Welfare is an approach that describes the interrelationships between animal welfare human well-being, and the physical and social environment. That's why in this One Welfare approach, we have 3 different working dimensions, and in each of these dimensions, there are different working groups or different topics that affect at a different level human well-being, animal welfare, and the environment protection. As you can see in the One Welfare umbrella, there are different projects or lines where we have been working protecting animals from human abuse and neglect, and how all of these different topics can be connected. Then we also have homelessness and all the different diseases, psychopathological issues, safety, crime, violence in the society, how this affects not only humans but also animals. There's also projects on prisons, for example, to rehabilitate humans by using animal connection. There's also topics surrounding sustainability as well as food safety. The protection of food chains and food production and the living conditions of the people that take care of livestock farms. Therefore, there are different areas. You can research in each one of these, and all of them have as a common thread the connection between animal welfare and human well-being. In this One Welfare approach, inside this huge umbrella, we also have our project, the Phoenix project, which was created a few years ago. The initial idea was to have an international aim working with professionals all over the world in order to review and create a technical working group. What we did was to send at that time a form where we tried to create a specific executive team. The key objectives of this project, this Phoenix project, are to facilitate the exchange, the publication and dissemination of information, articles, experiences, best practice in the area of animal and human abuse and neglect, including as well the possibility of creating clinical guidelines, as well as a general review that will make it possible to identify, when available, the connections between human well-being, animal welfare, and the environment. So at a different level, we've been working with different species, trying to understand this connection between these 3-dimensional abuse and violence and our work on the clinical guideline in order to be able to identify the problem and act upon it. What are we covering? Well, we are covering every single species, but specifically we are working on specific areas where we are trying to see, for example, how can we see everything in a different way? We are working on companion animals, working animals, and those that are part of the wildlife. But what have been the results, or what have been the outcomes that we expect to achieve? Well, as I mentioned, we want to create specific guidelines and guidebooks that will have a free access and will help veterinary professionals, doctors, as well as all the professionals, those that work in social services, that will also have to deal with this kind of services where you can find abuse situations. We also want these guidebooks to be practical and to be very simple so that anyone could understand the information. These will be training tools in order to disseminate information that we have on One Welfare and the connection between the violence that we see both in humans and animals dimensions. We've already done most of the work because we have a technical team already prepared, and then the next step was to create a series of subgroups with people that were going to be working on one specific term of reference. So we created 4 different subgroups. In these smaller groups, they are working independently, but following the same methodology so that we can all review the information, we can classify it, and we can, with all that information, create those guidelines that we aim to create. That's why we have different groups, this selection where we decided who was going to be part of each one of the group. We already done that. And nevertheless, we still have an email and we have a website just in case you might be interested and you might be still part of the project in different capacities. So in our free roaming working group, we have our chair, Mohamed Nader, and Rodrigo Nova, and then we have the rest of the members. We also have the group leads of the working animals and animals in entertainment working group. Well, there we have Joe Bailey and Marisa Erasmus, and then the rest of the colleagues that will be part of this working group. And finally, we also have working animals and animals in entertainment working group. The group leads are Andrew Morrison and Julie Mendez Ferreira. And then again, all the members that have been selected for this group. And in the companionship working group, we have as group leads Adele and myself and the rest of our colleagues that are working to create these specific guidelines. There's another group that has to do with lab animals, but we have not all of the information available yet, but it's there, it's there. So this is part of the Phoenix project. It's something new, very innovative. We are at the avant-garde. We're trying to assess the information we have on violence and abuse and neglect on animals and humans, trying to achieve an exhaustive, comprehensive review of all the information that we have to create these guidebooks, these guidelines that will help those that will part of the community, whether they are veterinarians, medical doctors, or members of the social services. There are so many different professionals, mental health professionals that could be interested in this kind of guidelines, and even politicians, why no? And so these are guidelines that will be available for everyone. They can be for professionals or for anyone. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. My whole team is here for you. Whatever you need, just tell us. And I hope you keep on enjoying the rest of the conference because we all need to learn a little bit more about different topics that have to do with the One Welfare approach. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Evelyn. You did well. Now, Dr. Till, we have questions from Dr. Rebecca. The question is, have you identified any differences between countries in understanding or adoption of the link, please?
Yeah, can you hear me, Mohammed?
Yes.
Okay, good. The link is a universal phenomenon. It occurs everywhere, across all cultures, across all countries. We have a number of countries around the world where we're seeing a lot more interest in it. Yankees work in the Netherlands, for example, is a great example, and there are a number of programs in the Netherlands. We have a link coalition in Italy. Spain is doing remarkable work, not only with One Welfare, Nuria Herol's work with her Observatorio and setting up pet-friendly animal shelters across Spain. The Links group in the UK and what the Scottish SPCA are doing in the British Isles is remarkable. We have a wonderful new link coalition in Canada that's doing remarkable work. In the Asian region, there's a lot of interest in New Zealand and Australia, a little bit of interest in Japan. That's about it. Well, like I said, we have people in 55 countries who are on our newsletter. In fact, I just got requests from somebody in Germany just a few minutes ago who's interested in this. Got an email earlier today from somebody, from one of our readers in Nepal. So, I mean, it really is a worldwide phenomenon. It's a case of getting groups together, recognizing the significance of this. We have a toolkit on our website for starting local link coalitions, and that can work in any country in the world. And of course, we would like to see more groups getting involved with this.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Phil. Hi, Dr. Nyanke. How are you?
Yes, I'm fine. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Nice to see you. Please, Dr. Nyanke, we have one question for you. The question is, have you had more reports to the Veterinary Forensics Center?
We only, I don't know if I understood the question right, but we only have one center, and that's for the whole of the Netherlands. That's only one, and I think it's good to centralize it and not to have all different centers. If you centralize it, you have the knowledge at one place, and that's good, I think. But it's also, but everyone probably recognizes that a lot of work.
Also, you did training in the veterinary school as well?
Yes, we only in the Netherlands have one veterinary school, so that's easy because we're a small country, and that's where we teach our vet students. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Nyanke. Thank you, Nyanke, and thank you, Dr. Phil, and thank you all our speakers and our participants for your interactions today and your questions. Now we will move to our last session today with my colleague, Dr. Rebecca. Thank you. Dr. Rebecca, the floor is yours. Thank you.